and welcome to ACX University. I'm ANDREEA GABOR, a marketing specialist on the ACX team, here with my colleagues Scott JACOBI and Kelley Anderson from Wonder PR. Today, we're going to talk about what's new in the audiobook industry, how to start marketing your first ever audiobook, and some surprising new ways that authors are leveraging PR today.
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks for joining us, Kelley. I'm super excited to have you here, sharing some PR and marketing tips for our ACX audience. Welcome. Yeah, so why don't we kick things off by just having you talk a little bit about who you are, what Wonder PR is, and what you do for creators.
Wonder PR is a small boutique PR firm. It started in 2013. It came out of a hobby. I started as a reader. I love to read, and it started by me reading and reviewing books, and it just kind of morphed from there into what it is today. So we do everything from brainstorming covers to audio to setting up blog tours, all the marketing from A to Z. And I work with lots of different clients that are anywhere from just starting to New York Times bestsellers.
Speaking of New York Times bestsellers, one of your clients is Lauren Blakely.
Yes, I have been working with Lauren Blakely since 2013. We started out as I was one of her readers in her fan group, and she reached out to me to do some personal assistant work, and I have been behind the scenes as Agent K since 2013, doing all different kinds of tasks for Lauren, from giving opinions on all different things that she asked for my opinion on. It's very exciting to get to see behind the curtain of Lauren Blakely, because she is amazing.
Yeah, she's one of listeners' favorites. Does a lot of great stuff with ACX and Audible Studios. Really popular in audio, and I'm sure you're a big part of that.
A little bit, just a little bit.
And so, just to continue sort of setting the conversation up, can you help our audience understand what's the difference between PR and marketing?
PR is more about your personal brand. It's about who you are, and marketing is about your product and what it looks like. So, for example, I had a client whose initials were PG, and so we kind of just had some fun with that and turned her personal author branding into PG, parental guidance is always suggested. And then, her marketing was all packaged around the books that she put out. With the covers and the blurbs and things like that. So that's kind of the difference between PR and marketing.
Gotcha. So PR for yourself, your persona, and marketing for your products, the books and audiobooks or whatever you're putting out, really. So Kelley, let's kick things off with this idea of a new author, somebody that hasn't been in audio before, is maybe considering doing their first audiobook. What are some of the first things you would advise them to do? How would you lead them down the path if they came to you for advice?
So the first thing I would have them do is take a look at who the authors are that they find are the most similar to who they are. You want to kind of emulate what's out there, but not necessarily copy it. You want to adapt it to your own personal style. So if you write romantic suspense, you might go look on Audible to see who is narrating romantic suspense and listen to multiple narrators. Determine whether or not that voice sounds like your characters. And then when you find something that you really like, then as our PR firm works, we would work with you to find out if that narrator is available to work with you on your books.
Yeah, and what do you think about reading reviews? To kind of pair with the sample and the star ratings on Audible. On the one hand, everybody's got their opinion. On the other hand, sometimes you start to see trends develop. Is it worth, you think, an author reading the reviews and seeing what listeners think of a narrator?
I think sometimes it does help depending on what type of story you're writing. You can see the type of style the narrator, narrates in, and, some of the reviews might be a little bit helpful for that. And you can pretty much weed out who's leaving reviews that really don't correlate to what the book was about or how the narrator was narrating. It's pretty obvious. So I think you can find a little bit of helpfulness in those reviews.
Agreed. And what we usually tell people is don't just get hung up on one individual review, But if you start to notice trends, if over and over again listeners are calling out a specific thing about a narrator's voice or performance style, that might be something to pay attention to if it's coming up again and again.
Yeah, I would agree. That's definitely something to pay attention to.
And so, what if I'm an author? I probably have some preconceived ideas. I probably have some thoughts when I'm first getting into this. But then I do my research, I learn a little bit more. Is it okay to sort of change and learn from that and say, like, I need to alter my wish list, or, to incorporate what other people are reporting, reviewing into like what your wish list is for your production?
I think it's important to see what the market is doing and to see what's going on with your peer groups. But I also think it's important to realize that what works for one person won't necessarily work for you. So sometimes it's a matter of just taking a look at all the different things that you'd like to do and really prioritizing those based on what will give you the most ROI depending on what is going on in the current marketplace.
So, Kelley, what would your advice be for authors who are first getting into audio and wondering which of their books makes the most sense as that first entry into the audio field? Something frontlist, something backlist. I know there's a lot of talk back and forth about this in author communities.
I think front list is the way to go, and to try to release, all of your books as close as possible. Giving yourself, at least a 4-week window once you upload your audiobook to go live and do the best that you can to time it with your ebook and paperback release. Giving readers all the options at one time when you've released something is really ideal, and especially for WhisperSync on Amazon. For sure.
Yeah, we talk about format complete, right? Being able to offer your content in any format that your fans want, so you're not missing out on somebody who only listens to audio or potentially only reads. So that makes a ton of sense. I think that's a really good idea. So those are some of the beginning steps. We'll skip over a little bit some of the in-production steps and jump over to the marketing and PR side of things, because I know that's your wheelhouse. What does a marketing and PR strategy look like these days in the world we're currently living in?
One of the great things about marketing these days is how much of it is done already on social media. So even though we have, moved indoors, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that type of marketing was already active before the pandemic started. So it's just really important to continue those trends, and then to also build your own internal audience. So, work with people who are leaving reviews for your audiobooks and help to cultivate those people into being a part of a review team. Working with audiobook bloggers and encouraging them to feature your books. Also working with narrators, get to know the people who are narrating your books. They have their own audiences, especially right now. There are several narrators who have their own fan clubs, and that's built-in marketing that is fantastic, especially when they're posting every single book that they've narrated when it comes out. There are some fantastic bloggers out there like Viviana Izzo and Oral Fixation that are really great to market your audiobooks. If you work with an audiobook production company, they often will offer some additional support as well. But it's super important too to also create those relationships with your narrator.
And so what are some specific things that a narrator might be able to do to help with marketing? I know we talked about like booth selfies and behind the scenes content as we were, preparing for our talk today. Is that something fans really love? And what else can narrators do to contribute to the marketing?
They really do. They really love to see what's going on behind the scenes, and having your narrator read, a small excerpt or a little snippet, something that's really kind of pushing forward the message that you want to get out there about your book, is wonderful, and it really goes a long way.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we used to talk at Audible about how listeners are more likely to follow authors than narrators. But more so now these days, maybe it's like you said, with the rise of working from home, with people being more digital, with the advent of home studios and the narrators are more front and center, we are finding that people are following narrators more and jumping from like one series to another because they love that narrator so much.
That's right. It's really amazing how many people will just go onto Audible after listening to a book and go and check out everything else that that narrator has narrated, because they've actually, just absolutely loved their voice and what they brought to the story.
And so that brings up an interesting point. I think you and I were also talking about being really careful when you pick a narrator and thinking about how it plays into when your book is out and when you're marketing it. And noting whether a narrator is working a lot in other genres, and are people going to like genre hop, is that narrator working a lot in your genre and can help you bring like other similar fans in? Is that a concern as well?
I think it's something important to look at. I think in those cases, it's really important when you've had audiobooks out there that just aren't really doing anything. You may have, put together some audiobooks a few years ago and they're just stagnating and you can't figure out why. You may be advertising, you may be doing different newsletter marketing, and it's just not doing anything. And that's the time to really take a look at, the narrator and see, what is the narrator doing these days? Are they still narrating in your genre? Because if they're not, that's a big piece of marketing that you're missing. And that's where readers probably aren't, going to look for that narrator for other books in your genre. For instance, romance. If the person is now narrating self-help or horror, they're likely not picking up that romance audience. So it might be time to take a look at possibly, repackaging those audiobooks and having them re-narrated by someone new in the market.
That's really interesting, because I know there are narrators out there that prefer to zero in on like one genre and do it really well, and there are narrators there that really do enjoy to spread their wings a little bit and flex their creative muscles. So it's interesting to hear from the author's perspective, the marketing perspective, how that may play into their casting decisions.
And it's a good time to have that conversation too with your narrator that you worked with in the past. They may actually be supportive of you having those books re-recorded, because if it's not something they're really interested in, and someone else is trying to hire them for that type of work, that may be something they're running into as an issue. So they might be happy to let you have someone else take over those books and have someone new narrate them for you.
That's a really interesting point as well. And I think the important thing that you pull out there is to just have continual conversations with your narrator, to stay in touch. That to me sounds like a decision that would be good to talk to your narrator about, even if you own all the rights to the audio, just to, have that relationship with that creator and give them the respect of letting them know what's going on with your books and the work that they've done.
I think it's just super important to keep in touch, to stay in communication, when you can. And it's just always a great relationship to have with your different narrators.
So before we jump fully to our next topic, I did just want to talk about the situation that we're all in to a certain extent in the world, the elephant in the room, the global pandemic, and just trying to find out if 6 or 7 months into it at this point, in our marketing, if we're still addressing it, if we're still talking about it because it's the elephant in the room, or if we're just not addressing it because people understand it's part of the way things are at this point, and it's people want something different.
I think it depends on the genre that you write. So if you're a romance author, chances are that you're not out there talking about the pandemic and have that in people's faces. Right now, romance authors are writing about escapes and happily ever afters. That's what their readers are looking for. But if you're, somebody who's a prepper, definitely, I think, they're talking a lot about the pandemic and how to prepare and, be ready for, if things were to get worse. But I think, a lot of other genres, even sci-fi or horror are definitely probably taking a different route.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you. So what are some of the best ways, now that we've talked about how so much more marketing has gone online, become digital? Frankly, it was going that way anyway, but I think this has all accelerated it. what are some of the best ways to engage an existing fan base and keep your content relevant?
I think, it's just, I've had several clients that they've created Facebook fan groups and they started those before the pandemic. But now what they do is they'll have Zoom calls, with their fan group, or they'll do, a Facebook Live session. They try to get more, FaceTime, which, it can be challenging for people who don't want to show their face. Especially some authors who have pen names. They have, day jobs where they, never had anticipated being in front of an audience. I did have one client for a really long time who wore a unicorn head. She would do Facebook Live sessions with a unicorn head on, and, that drew quite the audience, and it did allow her to connect with her readership.
Was there a connection to her content? Was she writing like unicorn romance, or?
She was not. She just, she liked unicorns, and so it was a gigantic unicorn head that she could put on and talk, and everybody could still hear her, and that was the way that she chose to communicate.
That's her personal brand at this point, right? That's some PR for herself, being a unicorn.
Yes.
And so, it's funny. I'm thinking that much like you mentioned, going to Audible, listening to samples, we talked about reading reviews, right? Learning what the people that you want to model yourself after are doing. That also seems like it would be a good idea when thinking about starting like a Facebook group or a fan club or something. Go into a Facebook group of somebody that's doing something similar to what you want to do, and maybe lurk for a little bit, study it, because there's definitely some do's and don'ts of running a Facebook group and how much you market yourself in there and all that. Would that be a valuable experience? And also, two-part question, are there some examples of like Facebook fan groups you could mention so that our audience could go in and study them for themselves?
I mean, I think it's always good to take a look at what everybody's doing. I don't know about going into an individual author's Facebook group and kind of spying on them. I mean, people will do what they'll do. I think you can look at some of the multi-fan groups and really get an idea of how engagement works. So things like oral fixation or audiobook loving, I think those are good places to really see how authors engage with listeners, because multiple authors are going in there. And the neat part about those groups is that you get to see how all these different authors interact with different listeners. So it's like, I guess, a one-stop shop if you are really wondering what you can do, because you can take a look at, how many comments were on this post? Did it really work? What really engaged the listeners, to take a look at what content this person was putting and sharing in here.
Yeah, and I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention Audible's Here For It Facebook group, and that's HEAR for it. And that's another group that services just all different kinds of listeners, and a good place to really get some insight into what Audible listeners like. So hopefully Audible appreciates me mentioning that one. So what are people like Lauren Blakely and Viviana doing with blogs or with Facebook that's been really successful that you think people could learn from?
I think Lauren really does a fantastic job with her audio teasers. She does teasers where she has just like audio in the background and the cover on the front. And then she also does, she gets a lot of booth material, which is fantastic, where the narrator's in the booth and they are just recording one little short snippet for Facebook and Twitter. And then the other thing that Lauren does, which I absolutely love, is her bonus content. Her audiobooks always have so much fun material in them. There's, a lot of times there's outtakes, just little extras, interviews, all that kind of stuff. And it really just makes the product extra special.
That's really cool. And that reminds me of like I was going to say DVD edition, but I'm probably dating myself. But, some of these home releases that have this additional content, that's if like I would be thrilled with that. Like that's such a really cool way to just provide extra value, especially if your fans have already read your print ebook edition. Well, now here's another reason to double dip and get the audio as well.
Exactly. They get a lot more information in the audiobook sometimes than they would in the ebook, for sure.
So continuing along the theme, How are creators marketing without things like in-person events or book tours or conferences or things like that? What are some of the replacements that are popping up for those things while we still can't do them?
Again, I think it just all comes back to social media. It comes to, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just getting, interesting content up. Posting things that, a reader might see fly up in their feed and go, "Ooh, what is that? That sounds interesting." Um, you know, Having graphic material that's, attractive to the eye and is done well. It's always worth the money, in my opinion, to hire a graphic designer. I love my authors, and they're very talented at writing. Leave the graphics to the artists.
So, without things like in-person book tours or live events or conferences or things like that, how are you advising creators to connect with their fans, to market to their fans, to replace those events that we're not doing right now?
Again, I think it's important to, be active on social media, to, if you can do, fun activities on Zoom. That's always great. Be active in a Facebook group. If you don't have a Facebook group, you probably want to start one. And just be available.
And so I'm curious. I've got a Facebook group. I'm a creator. Am I doing things related to my book? Like, am I doing maybe a reading or something along those lines? Or should I be engaging my fans with something human and something that's completely unrelated to my book, but draws them into me and my personality?
I think you have to do a mix of both. So I think, um, readers are looking for the content they can't find in the book when they're on your social media. They're looking for the sneak peeks and the snippets and the behind the scenes and what's coming up in the next book. Like, what's the hidden content that's not out there that they can't Google? So that's a really great time to share what's coming up next. And then also, to share if you're, into cats or dogs or, horses, share that information. Readers can connect with it.
Unicorns.
Unicorns, yes.
Right. And so, aside from video, getting into like the written word, because that's a big part of what we all do, newsletters still relevant, no longer relevant now that we have video. What are your thoughts there?
I think email is still an important mode of communication. I think a lot of people still aren't on social media, and the only way they get their news is through email. But I think it's really important for you to analyze your newsletter and take a look at what people are clicking on and separate it out into different groups. Market only to your audio group. You can see who's clicking on what and put audiobooks into one category. Also, there is the opportunity for text messaging nowadays. Several authors will send out a text when they have a new release, and that's a great way to reach people who really don't check their email as often and maybe don't have time for social media.
And that feels like a really intimate connection to me, where you can avoid checking your email for a while. You can, filter the newsletter into like a promotions tab or something. But a text message on your phone is going to be much more intimate, much more immediate. It feels like that could, if a listener, a reader is really willing to opt into that, they're giving you a sign that they really want to be connected with you.
Yes, those are definitely your readers and listeners who want to get the content first. They want to know the second that you have something release, and they want to be able to click on it. And they are the one-click addicts, we like to call them. And that is a fantastic group to have set up for text notifications.
All right, so that's some great information about text messaging and how intimate that is with your fans. I did want to double back quickly before we get into our wrap up and our final questions here. When it comes to the newsletter, you talked about separating out your audience, having audio fans, an audio newsletter, and a print or ebook newsletter. And it makes a ton of sense to market what people indicate they like directly to them. I'm curious if you advise authors to occasionally cross over and highlight their audiobook to their print or ebook newsletter to try and pull some of those audiences over to the other format. Is that worth trying?
I think it's important to keep information on your audiobooks in your ebook and paperback newsletter. So when you have a new release, you want to have first content be about your ebook and paperback in a newsletter that's geared towards the paperback and ebook newsletter readers. And then also have a small piece about your audiobook. And then take your audiobook newsletter and really focus that on audio. If you can put a video in there, of a audio snippet, that's fantastic in your audiobook newsletter as well. So really just kind of have a smaller focus of audio in your regular newsletter and a larger focus of audio in your audio newsletter.
That makes a ton of sense. And then hopefully you earn some new audio listeners and your audio newsletter just continues to grow. And then eventually everybody's getting 2 newsletters from you. Perfect.
Yes.
So as we start to wrap up here a little bit, what's the blank space in marketing right now? What's the future look like? What's on the horizon?
I think, there's lots of different things going on in the market right now. One of the most interesting things I've seen is a lot of crossover in the narrators in the MF market, kind of crossing over into the MM market, which is kind of neat. There's been some really strong narrators like Teddy Hamilton, who've done a fabulous job doing MM audiobooks. And I think it brings a lot of readers from the MF side into MM who may have never listened to an MM audiobook before.
And just to be clear, for our non-romance creators out there, MM and MF are?
Male and male-female romance.
So one of the other exciting new developments that you and I were talking about is the idea of getting celebrities to work on your audiobook, actors from film or TV, maybe minor characters, maybe big-time characters. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How are authors making that happen?
Well, during the pandemic, a lot of actors are out of work. So several of them have kind of turned to voiceover work, and that includes audiobooks. I know very recently Lauren Blakely put out a book called The What If Guy, where she got Santino Fontana, who is the voice of Hans, to play one of the cats in the book. She also got a Marvel movie actor to do a minor role called Mr. Measure. So there are lots of opportunities to grab different people to do, supporting roles in your audiobooks.
Yeah, that is really cool and provides a great marketing opportunity if you've got a big name attached to your title, and you're able to use them for marketing. They're going to have a fan base that you're going to be able to draft off what they've already done.
Yes, and it just makes for a lot of fun when you're trying to market those books, just to have something a little different.
And tons of content, I'm sure, because you're not sitting there going, oh, what am I going to talk about here? What am I going to talk about there? There's all this new, exciting celebrity and all this other stuff they're tied into.
That's correct.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you are a celebrity. You are wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think we had a lot of good information here for creators of all kinds. Hopefully some good stuff about putting yourself out there, how to get your audio out there. If there's any kind of parting thought, one big thing you want our audience to take away, what would that be?
I think it's just taking a chance. I think people are a little bit intimidated by audio at times. They get a little bit overwhelmed, and you can start small, one book at a time, and just kind of, take a listen to something if you're not sure. Is there an author that you really like to read? Go take a listen to their audiobooks. Find something you like. There's so much content out there. There's so much that's changed over the years, and things are different. It's definitely worth it. Even you don't have to start big. You can start small, and it's worth the chance.
I love that. If there's something you want to do, just do it. Nobody's going to do it for you. Just go do it yourself and make your dreams come true.
For sure.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you again for your time. I learned a ton, and I hope everybody else out there in our audience did as well.
Thank you for having me.
You heard it from Scott and Kelley. There's so much opportunity in the audiobook marketing space. Now it's time to take advantage of it. To hear more from Kelley and see what Wonder PR can do for you and your next big audiobook, check her out on Facebook. If you want to hear more from us at ACX, stay tuned to our YouTube marketing playlist. And we've got even more resources on our blog at blog.acx.com. Thanks for tuning in.